So I hand over now to Gary Thompson. Gary, dairy farmer from North Antrim, is current chair of the AgriSearch Dairy Committee. A very capable man.
Thank you very much. Ian, can I ask the guys to come back to the platform, please? Yeah, we're really up here. It's a culmination of today's, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this conference. I found it really interesting. But these guys are all very well travelled. And in your travels, what are the key challenges and opportunities for the Northern Ireland dairy sector? Let's start with Annie.
I was looking at you. From my travels, I think one of the key things to bring back home is wherever I go, I've been, in the last 12 months, I've been Japan, Germany, Denmark, USA, Canada, and New Zealand, and Brazil, actually, also Brazil. The question that when you get on farm is everyone wants to know what's going on over here. We're doing a really good job, we are. That everybody wants to know what's happening on farm in terms of research, innovation, profitability, what's the latest thing in farming in GB and Northern Ireland. They want to know that because they're looking at us to provide some leadership in those areas. So I think that's really important to understand. But in terms of challenges and opportunities, obviously there's lots. I think one of the things that we've spoken about today is I think there's definitely opportunity for greater collaboration between, say, agronomists, nutritionists, farmers, vets, to try and take some of those ideas that are already out there and make them practical on farm. There's lots of things that have happened in research that have kind of been parked because academics don't necessarily know how to take that thing forward. So there is opportunity for people to collaborate to try and do some of those, but also to try and feed things back up the chain so that those people at the top of it understand the research that needs to happen. I think there's sometimes a disconnect between those two areas.
So, but what does that look like? So have you seen examples elsewhere where that collaboration has really worked or that knowledge exchange has really worked?
Yeah, so probably the best example that I've seen of that is over in the US, where they have an entirely different system of delivering knowledge exchange to what we have, and it's more sort of state-based, and they're trying to roll things out from the university within that state out to the farming sector. And the reason they're so good at it is because they're paid for it. So the academics can't reach the point where they become a professor without having collaborated with the industry on the ground and driven some change in terms of what's happening in farming. So that's probably the best example that I've seen. So that would be, they're definitely, in terms of my field, they've definitely lowered phosphorus levels across the whole of the US using that technique. Whether our academics, I don't know if we've got academics in the room and I'm going to offend them, whether our academics would do that, I don't know because they're not paid for it. So we've got to find that way of generating change on farm in a practical way and making sure that we see that research coming through.
Okay. Well, maybe I could move on to Nial, because you mentioned research. So I understand Nial as well has been well-travelled and worked overseas, has also been working on a PhD. So maybe you could tell us about some of that work and where you think there's research holes in your field of expertise.
Don't know if I'd call it expertise, but yeah, I was very interested just from the US experiences on just this transition, and Claire very well explained the far off close-ups, and there's been a big emphasis on that for 40 years probably. But I feel the transition period is after the calve as well, and I think that's one period. The first year I went to the US, 20 years ago now, so I did the fresh cow check every morning, so there'd be loads of fresh cows lined up, and they're all less than 3 weeks calved. And I remember one time we made a ration change based on somebody's idea, a bit higher protein, lower starch for a US diet, and higher fiber, and the cows just took off. It was just night and day. So I've tried that ration change a few other times, and I just think this... And I was talking to Keith about there are some more research coming out about higher protein, and it's just for those first couple of weeks, but that dairy cow's got so much fat and muscle, and she changes the way she uses energy in those first couple of weeks until she gets going. So I just wonder where that's one area. And I've done some work with guys at Michigan State who are looking into different fatty acid profiles just to get them through make them more resilient in those first couple of weeks, and different anti-inflammatory regimes just to bring down the fat mobilization. So it's really just controlling that. I mean, it's very, very important to control the energy and everything at the dry period, but just getting them going that first couple of weeks as well. I think there's a research gap there.
So I think you mentioned in your talk as well about a really high level of protein the first couple of weeks. What sort of levels are we talking about?
We were feeding about 20% for those first couple of weeks. And again, I know it goes against the nutrient, but she eats in grams, not percent, and she's deficient in energy and protein those first couple of weeks. So, and some bypass, like, I always wondered, everybody sees a cow just calves, she goes mad after the cleansing to eat it. And people say, it's because, in nature, wolves are around, they don't want to know they had the calves. Well, wolves are smelling it a mile off, so she needs high protein, a certain type of protein, to help her carry the fatty acids around. So I think there's definitely something in it.
Okay, that's all really interesting. I don't think that's something I've heard really covered before, so thanks very much. Keith, what about you?
The protein thing is definitely interesting, isn't it? The research that's coming out about muscle mobilization and cows not getting back into positive muscle balance till 150, 200 days of milk is, that's a long old time to be losing muscle. And so there's definitely work to be done there. But also I think there's two bits. There's, we can do it, it makes a difference. But if you've 2,000 cows running a fresh group's piece purse, if you've 200 cows running a fresh group's much more difficult. And so there's what we need to do, but how we actually achieve doing it. And there's value in having research to actually do that as well. But the things, you talked about, what are the benefits that we've got in Northern Ireland? Like, it takes a hell of a conference to bring this many people into a room, and the quality of people that come into a room, and there's huge value in learning from each other, I think, and that's, and how you get those on-farm trials and how you get the little wins and spread that knowledge is a massive opportunity.
So in your experience, where are the holes? If you had a decent budget of, say, 4 or 5 million quid, where would you start?
How out of the box do you want to go? I mean, I think there's a real, this P equals G thing of, like, our environments that we're trying to measure genetic response across are so broad. You look at like the UK base or the US, both, are so different. We've got guys with sand versus guys with mats versus guys that carve in the autumn versus guys that carve all year round versus guys that feed 100% grass versus guys that feed 50% grass. It's so broad, and we're expecting those genetics to respond the same in each farm. Well, they definitely won't. And so if you can define that environment much more narrowly and look at the genetic response, I think there's real value there to be had. But that's a lot of work.
So one of the things I was wondering whenever you were giving your talk was, we're picking bulls and we're using genomics to pick bulls and pick cows, but we're still being quite, it's quite rudimental how we do it. So can we go to another stage whereby we use something like AI to really look at the genetics and match them to improve genetic? Is that a possibility, or is that just pie in the sky?
Yeah, I don't, realistically, the graphs that Conor put up of phenotypic response to genetics, we could do those every single day. Right? We could tweak environmental things. You'd tweak ration and look about what actually gives you your best response to genetics. Part of the challenge we have at the minute from a genomic point of view is that we presume that every genetic trait is additive, right? So if you get one copy of it, it gets you 100 kilos of milk. You have 2 copies of it, that's 200 kilos of milk. Right? If you have 1 copy of it, that saves you, a point of conception rate. 2 copies is 2 points. We know that genetics doesn't work like that, but that's the only way we can make it work. Whereas actually AI is going to come in and we'll start looking at how those gene-to-gene interactions work, and then how do they work on your farm versus someone else's farm. There's no reason that instead of running those correlations once a year, like I think the first time probably I did yours, about 10 years ago, you could do them every day. And then you could start to look at actually what are the environmental impacts that make a difference there.
Okay, thanks very much. Conor, where do you feel the research needs are for NI agriculture?
Well, NI, there's a few things. One big issue locally is TB. Now, I don't know how you have no answers to how you research away out of that, but it's something that needs looked at. The other big thing, we've also poultry at home, and like poultry gains and feed efficiency are like off the scale compared to dairy. Like, 10 years ago we were probably feeding 1.6 kilos of feed for every kilo of poultry meat. Today it's down at 1.3. So, and it's a thing, genomics, you can genomic test, you can find feed efficiency scores in there. So probably research and feed efficiency, like we all have a lot of computerization in farms and through the internet, through TeamViewer, that type of thing. AgriSearch could probably be plugging into that data to try and harvest data from farms locally.
You see, there's a lot of data already out there, and especially yourself with loads of technology, but what are the questions we need to be asking of AgriSearch to go and look for within that data? Where are the holes that you see as like, well, if I could make better use and more efficiency of my feed or my genomics if I had this data, so we have lots of data, but we haven't got information. It's like, what do we need to do to tease this out?
Probably going to your more computer type people and harvesting that to product and use AI, use whatever to bring it something meaningful for the local farmers. It's getting that data, and it's probably feed efficiency. Feed efficiency is one of the biggest costs in the farm, so I would start with feed efficiency.
Feed efficiency also links back to, so it's we can all drive for yields, but it depends where legislation comes with and where we're limited against nutrients, I guess. So feed efficiency and using genomic information and genetic information to drive feed efficiency, I guess for me, this is where it's come from in out of the conference today. Claire, what are your thoughts?
I'll always keep it local. Challenges that are day to day on farm, labour is going to be a big one. Getting labour in, but also running your farm in a labour efficient way, identifying your system and designing your system in the most labour efficient way. And there can be big changes that can be made to a lot of farms. Labour, milk solids, the way processors are changing pricing policies, milk solids has to be a big focus going forward. And we've well proven that Holsteins can work the A plus B minus C system, but we can drive that further. These lads have well shown that genetics is a big thing there, nutrition is a massive thing. There's a lot of things. Annie's very clearly said that there is a lot of research there. Delivering at the farm is probably one of our biggest things that we're not that great at. So milk solids, labour, and the last thing is longevity. And there'll be a trade-off between genetic progress and longevity. We want cows living longer, but we don't want to slow genetic gain. And I think we get a wee bit lost sometimes in that there. Where is the tipping point in terms of genetic gain versus getting cows living longer and identifying that on a farm-by-farm basis?
Well, I guess the crux of the problem is how can AgriSearch help address this? So you say that we need to get information. So there's lots of research out there, so how do we apply it to our farms here in Northern Ireland? And how do we get that information out? So Conor's kind of mentioned that as well. It's like, well, where do we go? What's wrong with the system? So do we need a review of research that already happens and find the holes? Where do we go? Like what? This is about the questions. Is like, where do we go? What's it?
It's the conversion of that research into practical everyday stuff. There's a lot of research behind a lot of that presentation, but I've tried to convert it into very simple things, and it can be done. There's just probably not enough people doing it. Probably it's not being done in universities, probably the way it should be. Our next generation coming through aren't seeing this thing at university.
So Niall, you've been involved in a lot of information and information gathering and data transfer, and putting that work together into really useful information. So how can you take those learnings you've seen from overseeing and apply them to here? What do you think we need to do?
I think on that point about just getting it across, when Annie mentioned about the US system, so they have this extension service, it's called. So an academic will have to spend so much X% on farm. So they have to do things like this, go around farms. And I've, worked in the US when times were good and also when times were really bad. It's all, it's a very boom and bust capitalist culture. Also did a calving season in New Zealand, and the best innovations always come from the farms, and they usually come when things are bad. When you really have to, necessity is a mother of invention. So innovation kind of comes from the dairy farm operation itself, because it's commercial. So having that extension program in the US and in New Zealand, to some extent, it's a similar thing. I think that's missing here. The research that I've been involved with is they're chasing after the grants all the time, and they're missing that on-farm knowledge and on-farm really communication and touching base with the farmers and seeing what they want. So I think having some kind of extension arm to academia or that knowledge flow would really help.
Keith, what have you witnessed overseas?
So I think it's bridging that gap is massive. If it makes everyone feel any better, it was as difficult when I worked at Genus to get the researchers and the PhDs sat in a room to be able to actually communicate with sales guys and farmers. To be fair, I think more difficult than I found it as a farmer. But if you can do it, that's where the real value comes out, because it's not just, living in this world where you click your fingers and make the change. It's actually how do you make the change on the farm, the practical elements of it. It's a bit like collect the data, do the data. There's no point having it if you don't do anything with it. Same as if it's great genomic testing on your animals. If you don't do anything with the data, it's pointless. And enabling farmers and enabling all of us to get that information back and then know what to do with it. That's where the real win is, right? That's where the value is. If we don't make changes, then it's all pointless. That's about where I go.
I think it's sticking at it as well. I think researchers, I can say this because I used to be in academia, we want the next thing, the next shiny new piece of research that they can publish papers on. But actually, it in terms of making it research and innovation applicable to what's going on farm, it doesn't work like that. You've kind of got to keep saying the same thing in terms of the latest stuff tells us we should be doing X and we'll get Y. And you've got to keep going down that road, not go, well, actually, I was doing protein 6 months ago. Now I'm actually want to talk to you about starch. Because actually what happened to that piece of work around protein, it's having those people that can do it and disseminate that information consistently.
So what I've heard you both really say, it's about behaviour change and changing culture and people. So Keith, you manage quite a number of staff, and you've also started a second farm, managing those staff. So how do you get behaviour change within your staff, and how do you drive excellency? Because ultimately it's about the same thing as transferring. So we've said we've got lots of research, we need to transfer it to farmers. So it's a similar process. You've got lots of staff. How do you transfer what you want to happen to those farmers to drive behaviour change? Have you any tips?
Yeah, so we manage, it actually gets easier when you get more people. I think that, to be honest. Because you can invest more, right? So the way we manage all of our big pieces of training so we do all of our own trims in-house. So for foot trimming, every year we get Nick Bell, who I'm sure some of you all know, comes and does trim training for 2 days for all of our guys, and he comes every year on the same day, and you book the next year in when he's here the first year, and just repeat. And that works really well. We use the same thing. Tim McKendrick, who some of you will know, is a really good mastitis consultant. He comes in twice a year, every year. We go through the same graphs, we go through the same KPIs, we go through the same protocols, and reinforce. And the thing is, right, the guys get a free lunch and they have a nice time, right? If you make it a positive experience, they'll take the stuff away positively. And we do that for every key point. So we'll have we have actually not my brother, but a different vet comes in and does calving cows. Someone else comes in and does something else, but it's a different voice that's not me, right? Because invariably I'm super positive or super negative, right? And neither of those two things are particularly stable sort of learning experience for the guys, whereas someone else coming in, they can listen for a short period of time, really pay attention and really take it in. And I know that works really well for us.
So research needs is often about limiting factors, and once you get really high yields, then your limiting factors are different to those that's on, say, a 9,000 litre cow. So you've taken on a new farm, your limiting factor was labour, you've changed that. So what are your limiting factors now? So I can't remember, I think you're doing 12,500 litres or thereabouts. So what's stopping you doing 14? Where's your ceiling? What's your limiting factors?
Forage quality is massive. In a year like this, you can maybe afford to buy some litres, but there's plenty of years where you can't afford to buy litres, and we need to be getting yield from forage as high as possible. It's a problem that you guys might come to face, but we drought out a lot, and so grass qualities and quantities are challenging, and that'll be a big focus for us. After that, attention to detail, little bits of barn improvement still. We didn't finish the last project before we took on the second project, so going back and finishing all those bits will make a difference. Transition success is constant. Little tweaks to diet, little tweaks to this. It feels like it's little bits of everything, I think.
Do you feel there are limits to what you can achieve with genomics and genetics? Is there a glass ceiling there that you're going to hit?
No, cows keep getting better. They'll keep getting smaller. They'll keep giving more milk. They'll keep getting more efficient. They'll keep getting more effective.
But what's your thoughts, Conor? Because he's just used a dirty word for you and me north of the Loch, drought.
Right, now, what's right?
But what's your thoughts? Where's the limiting factors for your cows?
Well,
what do you need to change?
a local thing is probably land availability. You know what it's like up around us, Gary. Just having a security of land. The whole connector system in Northern Ireland's pretty crap. If you secure land and have it stable, you have a good reseeding policy, as Claire talked about. The other big limiting factor is probably our environment. So our housing's probably not as good here as like you go to America, sand bedding, like we're in slats. Slats are probably the worst thing you can put cows' feet.
We're trying to be positive here, Conor.
Well, you're asking for limiting factors, Gary. You're wanting the positives.
So where do we need to go? What's the I'm trying to find out what's the whole. So you say genomically, what do you think you can achieve more still?
Oh, it's the components. Like, look what we've done in the last 5-6 years. And the way our payment system's going, we'll just keep driving, probably not more litres, but more fat and protein. The nutritionists have to feed more because it's higher concentrate milk now we're on. So I'd say there's a lot of gains yet in fat and protein, health traits, that type of thing.
Claire, do you agree?
The sky's the limit. If you think of where every farm was 5 years versus where it is today, it's going to be the same again. Or 5 years, like, there's always something you can improve: nutrition, fertility, everything. There's just continuing research coming through and just keep doing a better job. Like, it's never going to stop.
Is inbreeding going to be an issue with genomics? Or are we going to focus on the one case? Give me a dirty look. Is that? Are we going to focus on if we all focus on the same thing, is that going to lead to a narrow pull of genetics?
The only thing I'd say about inbreeding, they've been talking about inbreeding as a problem since ever I've been breeding cows, and it's still not a problem.
I think if people can understand what the problem is, then that would help in the first place. Like I don't know, it feels like each company's got its own problem at the minute. This genetic protection and contracts malarkey is gonna cause some problems. But the problem we have is so traditionally we'll use like an inbreeding limit of 6.25%, right? The only reason we use that is that's what first cousins are, and we think that's a bit weird in people, so we think it's a bit weird in cows, right? It's not like you get to 6.25 and all of a sudden all of the offspring are born with like 2 heads and 3 tails, is it? I think my gut feel says the more inbred we get, the more challenges we're going to have. We've had a couple of muscle weakness, like recumbency calves this year, which are the first, we've never had anything like that before. And that is an inbreeding challenge. Is it going to be a problem today? No. Is it going to be a problem in 10 years' time? Maybe.
Moving on to a different topic is, Anna, I was just wondering, you mentioned monitoring earlier, and you kind of touched on it a wee bit. It's like, what's the ideal system we could use to monitor, excess nutrients in dairy cows?
I think the ideal system depends on the system that you're running on that farm. So that looks different if you're calving all year round to if you're block calving, because you're effectively, your best monitoring system is trying to monitor some sort of weakness within that system. So if you're block calving, that should be relatively easy to do, because what we're essentially trying to do is monitor, have we got any weakness around that transition period? And have we got any weakness around perhaps hitting peak lactation and that sort of thing? So we'd be looking at blood sampling, liver sampling, but also making sure that we're doing that forage analysis at critical times. But I think the most important thing with it is that we take that data and we try and make something meaningful from it. So what is that data actually telling us about, should we make dietary changes to what we're feeding those cows? Should we change supplementation plan? Should we change energy protein balances? What is that data telling us? And to be honest, that's an ever-evolving science in terms of what we're trying to hit into nutrient profiles. It's a conversation that I'm having all the time with vets around trace elements and what is the target range that we're hitting. Because we're still using target ranges in terms of mineral profiling and trace elements, that sort of thing, that they were using 20 years ago. We've just heard from these guys how much cows have changed over the last 20 years. So I think it's measuring and monitoring on individual farms to see what changes that we can make in that system to drive performance, but making sure that we're using it in terms of making it something that's actionable. Because it's not really expensive, but it's not cheap either. So we've got to make sure that we're creating data we can actually use, and I think that looks different in different systems.
Okay, thanks very much. So what I've really heard is about turning data information and using that information to drive behavioural change. So, I'd like to bring this session to a close. Please fill out the feedback forms, the farmer survey. That's how we get data and information back about today. So thank you very much. Give these guys a round of applause. Thank you.